All right. Anybody else have permission slips? Nope. Okay.
I'm so sorry, I completely forgot.
It's okay. All right, so we have 2 bell works for today. So the first is in our notebook and answer the question, in case of an accident, what are the steps we need to take? And then we also need to draw our perfect bonfire or campfire on our whiteboards. Jackson, look like they have a great one, good one. So
It doesn't have any
Houston.
fire yet.
Oh, okay.
There we go.
Looks pretty good though so far.
It'll be a green thing. Well, that's pretty good. Maybe that. Figure out more.
Bonfire. That'll be fun.
Great looking bonfire. I like it.
I like
I
fire.
wish we had more colors.
Alright, so we're just gonna draw a bonfire or a campfire. Like the perfect one.
There's big and huge.
It's just a normal fire. That's a tiny fire.
You like
Look
it?
how big the whiteboard is. You need to make it bigger. You gotta make a.
But that's not all.
You gotta make a stone.
Okay, looks good.
You know that sand pile?
That's so big. That hand isn't crippled.
It's like our pile.
Right here.
So today we just have 2 bell works. The first one is to answer the accident question, and then you're gonna help Tyler, Russell, and Bubba draw the perfect bonfire or campfire. Okay?
Okay.
Make sure there's a couch on there too. Couch.
Without a case, we don't
What are those? Mine was better. His was You need it, you right there. Shade.
Like how tall your hair is.
I need that.
Tiny.
Okay.
Diesel. We cut down a freaking dead nitrogen. That's already great.
Yeah.
You like making a fire ring?
This might take us off that.
That fire was
They
like
can't, though.
12 feet high.
We got other stuff to do today.
They buy this. Yeah.
Another color in case you want to dress up.
We just chilled.
We didn't go to the flag ceremonies anyway.
I know. That's why they, that was so neat, like, oh, you invited us.
Wood is blue.
You didn't invite us.
Did you know that? Hey Caleb, you should throw me that black.
Alright, so while they finish up,
Yeah.
let's talk about accidents, okay? Easy.
Nice catch.
Okay, let's talk about accidents. What happens if we go out into the shop and we find Jaden laying on the floor unconscious?
Tell Mr. Wells. We'll just leave.
Okay, tell Mr. Wells
Or you.
or me,
Well, at least
Probably
one
gonna
person
rough
should
day.
come get you.
right?
And make sure that one certain person comes and gets you.
Okay, so one certain person
Yeah,
comes and tells the teacher, okay?
yeah. And everyone has to just stay there, try
And
to,
everyone just circles around and looks down.
or like try to
I go get
help out.
toe boots on.
Okay, so everyone else try to help you now, okay?
See if you breathe.
right?
Don't smack him around.
Don't
Make sure
put
he's
clutch.
not safe.
Because it's a huge fire pit. That's like a tree that big.
Okay, so tell the teacher someone has to stay with Jaden to make sure he's okay. Okay, so kind of see what's going on with him. Yep, necessary first aid. Yep, 911 if needed. Perfect, okay? So about our bonfire campfires, there's 3 things that make a perfect fire. Do we know what they are?
Fuel,
Gas.
air, and heat.
Gasoline.
Fuel, air, and heat. Perfect. So gas would be our fuel source though. So good work, Russell. Okay?
What's that called? The 3 things if we did a
The fire pyramid, I don't know.
fire triangle.
Oh,
Yep.
Fire triangle.
Close enough.
Perfect. So today we're going to talk about more about safety, so accidents and fires. So what are we going to do today? We're going to define the steps needed to take if an accident does occur. And one of these times we're going to have a mock accident. So you're never going to know when it's going to come, but one of these times in class, someone is going to come in and say, oh no, so-and-so is hurt, okay? And then we all have to go out and try to figure out what we're going to do. Okay? So it's kind of like to quiz you guys.
What if it's real though?
Well, if it's real, then we'll still do the same steps.
yeah.
But the one that I'm planning is just for practice, okay? So it's just like a mock accident.
Yeah, it's pretty
You
easy.
can make it look real,
I'd make it.
okay?
You're good.
We want to though. We're also going to describe the fire
Bubble
triangle.
volunteers to be the real one.
Okay, thank you. We're going to talk about how to use fire extinguishers today and the steps to take. Identify different types of fire extinguishers. Okay, so we go out into the shop and we find this guy laying there and he looks like he has like some blood on his leg.
Maybe he
Kick
tripped.
him in the head.
No,
Oh.
that's what not to do.
Oh, okay. Oh, we're still talking about you.
Easy. Okay. Alright, so what are we going to do if we find this guy out there laying like that?
Tell him to get up and walk it off.
Okay, so check to see if he's breathing.
Probably one of the first options.
So he looks like he's unconscious, right?
At least check to see if it's actually. And then if you know he's breathing, then we'll proceed. Go get someone.
Right, is everyone hearing Liz? She's got great ideas.
Gasoline tanks. How do you drive gasoline
I
tanks?
don't know. Did you hear what Liz said?
No.
Gotta talk louder, Liz.
Okay. First, you probably would want to check to see if the guy is breathing, and if he's unconscious, then you need to go get help. One certain person would have to go get the help. And there would have to be one person staying with the unconscious person.
Perfect. Okay, so first we're going to see if he, like, what's wrong with him. So we're going to assess the situation. So we need to kind of see what's wrong, like where he's hurt, stuff like that. Okay?
So like, for example, if the person got electrocuted, right, would we want to run up and grab him?
No.
But how would we know? How would we know? We kind of have to look around, right? There's a story, this is back in like probably the 70s. Because I got told it a long time ago, but there was like the star basketball player for Utah State was driving home late one night from a practice, and it was icy and it had got cold, and so the roads were really slick, and he came across an accident where a car had ran into a power pole, and there was an older couple inside the car, and so being a good Samaritan, good guy, he jumps out of his car, runs to help them. When they hit the power pole, they knocked the power line off. He ran into the power line. Couple's okay. They stayed in the car. He's dead. So anyway, you just have to be really careful before you want to help everybody that's hurt, but don't get yourself hurt doing it.
Okay? So after we assess the situation, Liz already kind of talked about that we need to tell the teacher, so either myself or Mr. Wells. Okay? Perform some basic first aid. We kind of talked about that in our bell work. So while someone is getting us, then you can start to get stuff out of the first aid chest. And then once Mr. Wells or I are there, then we can start performing what is needed, okay?
Where is the first aid kit?
Right.
Right here outside.
So since you, later after class, we'll do a shop tour. There's like an assignment with it, and also you get everything's at, and you have to draw the shops.
Okay.
Okay? Okay. So what happens if it's bad? A really bad accident. Yep, call 911. Okay? Anything else we should do? Just one more. What about everyone else?
Stay calm.
Okay, stay calm.
Yeah.
Okay? So keep others safe too.
Anybody here a sympathy puker? Someone else pukes, so you have to?
Yeah.
You ever heard of those kind of people?
Got a pretty sharp sunset.
Yeah, okay, it happens, like if there's a lot of blood and stuff like that, and someone might faint too. So,
If they puke on me, then I'll probably puke.
okay. So if we had an accident and someone is already like unconscious and stuff like that, and then there's blood too, and if someone else faints because of the blood, then we're gonna have to take care of them too. So we're gonna have like 2 accidents, okay? So there's 3 components that have to be present at the same time to increase the fire. And we already talked about them with your bonfires. What were they again?
Fuel.
Fuel, air, heat, perfect. Okay, so fuel, that's any combustible material.
A person?
Yeah.
Maybe like their clothes or something. Okay, so common fuels, what could be a common fuel?
Oxygen.
Okay, so oxygen kind of isn't combustible unless it's put with, which is,
Wood.
so what 2 tanks are out there? We have oxygen and we do have argon, but they're like right here. Acetylene, okay? So when those 2 are mixed, then they're combustible. What are some others?
When you're gonna make a fire, what do you get?
Wood. I already said wood.
Okay? So gas, kerosene, diesel, wood paper, acetylene, propane. In some of the other classes, we've talked a lot about the propane incident.
Oh.
Yeah, there's a paper out there that said don't be like Bo.
You have all the safety memes out there. So the advanced only class made these safety memes to try to give both intro to mech classes some advice. So the propane one came up twice.
Don't be like Bo.
Don't be like Bo. Yep.
Bo does it. A person.
Okay? Heat. That's the energy that causes the rise in the temperature. So what could be our heat source for our bonfires?
The fire.
Sun.
Yeah. It's like,
Magnifying glass.
yeah, magnifying.
Okay. Yeah, that could be our source. What about like matches or something?
Lighter.
I said a blowtorch. That's pretty
So
good.
matches like aren't really your source. Russell.
It's called a bow drill. You get a stick
Mm-hmm.
and a string.
So say it super loud so everyone can hear.
A bow drill.
Friction.
Right. So because of the friction, it causes enough heat to start the fire. Okay? So materials that aren't hot enough won't burn. So some of our labels and stuff like that, they say this product needs to be kept at a certain temperature. Why? Right, because what happens if it gets too hot? Yeah. Okay? So oxygen, that's the gas that helps the fire breathe. Okay. Anything else, Houston? Okay, good. Look up here. Okay? So oxygen is what helps our fire breathe. It helps it get bigger. Okay? There's a cool YouTube video of like a big welding plant that caught on fire, and you can see like the acetylene tanks burst and then shoot up. Okay? So because there's enough fuel and a ton of oxygen there, and make the fire a lot bigger. Okay, so here's our fire triangle. So what happens if, say, oxygen isn't present? No fire, right? What about if heat's not there? Right, so if one of those things is gone, okay, so the fire triangle won't work if one of those things isn't there. So how do we reduce hazards in our shop? Don't have hazards.
He said to not have oxygen.
Don't have oxygen.
Yeah.
I know, but
Then we would just die. It'd be
there's like
easier
oxygen
to
all
say
around
no
us
fuel.
though. Not just in the tanks, but we have to breathe it. So if we have certain things that could be combustible, like paints, greases, and stuff like that, dispose of them properly, keep them separate, right? Okay. What about like in the wood shop? What is all over the floor?
Sawdust.
Right. So what would happen if there was a spark in the wood shop? Right, because there's so much sawdust on the floor. Okay, so we need to store them in approved containers. So that's kind of also why we don't really take the labels off things. We keep them in their original container, so that if something does happen, we could refer back to the container. Okay? We talk about storing fuels away from other materials. That can burn easy. So would we keep our rags and our gas right next to each other? No? Why not burn?
Because like gas, you're on fire or something, the rags are right there, you're catching fire too.
Right. So what would happen to our fire if everything was kept close to each other?
It would only burn in one spot. No, I'm just kidding.
How did you almost catch your house on fire, Russell? What were you cooking? And what happened? Okay, so what happens in a grease fire? Okay, smolder it. What else could you use on a grease fire?
Fire.
No, don't use water. Don't use water.
Okay, so Tyler said water,
No.
and Liz says no water. Why no water?
I've had that experience
The grease
before.
like floats and then you just got floating fire everywhere.
Yeah, so so if I have a cup of water and I throw it onto the grease fire,
Just
it like splashes,
Yeah.
right?
I've had that happen to me. I was gonna make donuts with my friend, and I accidentally left the grease on a little too high, and it caught on fire. And I started freaking out. My friend started freaking out. I took it over to the sink. My mom was like, "Turn the water on," and my dad was running to try and tell me not to turn it on. So I turned it on, and the fire went higher up and made black marks all over our ceiling.
Yeah.
So
Okay, so you could smother it with like a towel or something. What is something else that you could use if you're in the kitchen?
Fire extinguisher.
Okay, so only a certain type of fire extinguisher though.
It's like that, are the ABC ones or every one you use, or this one?
I want to say it's like F. Because it has a certain mixture in it just for the grease. So my parents always told me that if there was a grease fire to get flour.
No. Isn't
No.
flour isn't flour like animal? I'm pretty sure it is. I'm pretty sure it is.
I think so too.
I don't know.
Yeah,
We
I'm
don't
pretty
put
sure it is.
flour on ours.
I guarantee you. It's
Baking
fun.
soda.
Baking soda. Maybe it was baking soda.
Me and Jacob tried
Yeah,
that.
flour.
Cornstarch does.
Cornstarch works pretty good.
Yeah, cornstarch.
Flour is actually like in a grain bin. Flour, it's like the dust from the wheat and all that's in there, and like a lot. If you get wet grain a little bit, right, and you put it in a bin to store it, what happens is it starts to ferment. If something ferments, what happens to its temperature?
It's hot.
It's hot. And then when it gets finally to the point, like, 'cause what happens is usually the air becomes the factor in that one because it's full, there's not a lot of air. And then somebody will open up the door, right? Because the grain dust is really bad. So yeah, I wouldn't put foul hour on it. Probably if you put enough to smother it, it'd probably be okay. But baking soda
Yeah,
is the way to go.
maybe it was baking soda.
Or the lid of the pan.
Like soda.
Yeah.
That didn't work for me. I took the pan off, or the lid off, and it started on fire. Then I tried to put it back on, and it didn't work.
Yeah. Okay.
So I threw the pan aside.
All right. So we talked about storing materials in cooler. Then what their label says. So use fire only in safe surroundings. So what would be like a safe surrounding out in the shop?
Oil, not around fire.
Not around oil, sawdust, fiery
metals.
things, combustible metals, right? There are combustible metals, and we'll talk about them if we get to them today. Okay, so I have this activity sheet
Sodium. Is there gonna be any sodium?
that is due at the end of today.
You put water on sodium?
We have the fuel right here, and then we really don't have like gas.
Looks like
Stuff like that. There's some in the cooler, dinner and stuff. We try to keep it away. So that's really where we don't really have to, like, if we were to have an actual cabinet that says.
Okay, so we all like understand how the sheet works.
Don't eat.
So, just on the storage, I put right here by the door, right? Right here we have our fuel. gas.
Oh.
So.
Oh wait, do we understand how the sheet works?
Yeah.
Yeah? Questions?
This is fuel, and right here we have our non-flammable gases.
Okay, so it says source of fuel. So you have to list out sources of fuel, and then do how to avoid.
Don't use that. Actually, it'd be more.
And then same with like source of ignition. So I gave the last class a hint.
How about that guy's cigarette?
Right. So the guys like in the break room, that's your hint. So that's like your one freebie.
The other one's smoking.
If you can find enough, that's still the one. Okay, and it's due at the end of the class for points.
And we just fill in the main
Yeah.
can.
Yep, find as many as you can.
Source?
Source of oily red.
Oh, source of fuel. Oh.
Oxygen. Acetylene.
I can't tell what that word says.
Oil.
Propane?
Starter fluid.
Kind of looks like maybe like some welding stuff.
Oh.
There is, over here. There's like everything you could ever need. There's definitely cam starter fluid. Paint
Do
can.
propane. Instead of propane.
There we go.
Let me know how that goes for you.
Fuel. There's definitely a can fuel stabilizer on that shelf. What else could blow up in that picture? My car looks like a piece. Yeah. Should put a spoiler on there.
No, put a small one on the car. You do oil and propane next to each other.
There we go. Nice.
Separate?
Yeah.
Oh, hey, there's hairspray.
Is there? Do you see the hairspray?
What else is there for fuel?
Get me top cleaner.
There's a spray bottle of WD-40 right
Yeah,
there.
WD-40.
Oh, okay. Is that what you think the hairspray was?
There's
Oh, okay.
window cleaner.
I don't think we have.
How to avoid hazard.
What about?
There's, bleach,
Source
is that
of
flammable?
ignition.
That guy's cigarette.
Yeah, no.
I don't
Cigarette.
even know about bleach.
Battery slash spark.
Right, what would paper be?
Oh, yeah, they like flying.
A source of fuel.
Yep.
Grinder.
There's, yeah, I was gonna say, there's
There's a grinder on the floor.
posters.
Oh, those racks everywhere.
Well, there's
Yeah, posters.
gases too close together.
Any ignition sources? Trey?
Is there acid in it?
Well, like,
How would you store acid?
I just store acid.
Yeah.
Very
What
careful.
else could spark?
And it's flammable liquids probably. Depends on what,
Burn it?
it depends on what. Acid usually only burns through certain things. So you want to store it in something that depends. Would some acid burn your stomach?
Your stomach acid burns your stomach.
That's why you make mucus.
Your stomach lining goes back so fast.
I think I have. I'll bet. There was supposed to have been a cooperating teacher handbook too that I threw away when I got the one you sent me. Because she says it.
Freeze.
That radio
Anyways,
is
so I
probably
have
grab
to email me again.
Okay.
I don't see anything.
What if the radio has a short end on the thing?
There's that
That
gasket
could
from
start something.
wait, well, the car seats.
Yeah.
Here, you can write that down. Radio ones.
Yeah.
Yeah, say how to avoid
The car.
Electrical part. The radio in our shop, we actually showed it. So maybe you can spark it. What else we can spark it?
Got one like that.
The catalytic.
Listen to the sign that says keep clean.
How about that?
Did you get your one freebie, Jaden?
Freebie.
Yeah. So I gave you a source.
Matches.
What are they doing?
Do you see any matches? I'm sure there is some.
Yep.
Withdraw box for matches.
That would be good.
So, down to the.
Oily rag. I want to write all these. Farther. There you go.
Yeah. It's a
Farther.
light bulb could explode.
Go to
Or good
The
oil.
grinder, if you are grinding something.
farther.
Well,
Yeah.
Makes sense, dude.
Thank you. Go to
My dad got an electrical engineering degree.
window cleaners, combustible. Cigarette. Some smoke. Maybe deodorant. It's freaking idiot. Battery, spark plugs. Put away.
This is a sign that says keep clean, right?
Yeah, that's the sciences. Grinder. That's just,
Just drop it.
It's impossible.
away.
You know how your computer
Shove
talks
it
about
in.
charges?
Jackson.
You're not incredibly hot.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Why do you think it could start a fire in